Grief is pain. There's no other way to really describe it. My friend once said to me, grief is praise. And she said it to me after my son's funeral. She said she watched my husband and I at his memorial and just thought grief is praise. And ever since she said that, I really felt like, no, grief is pain. And it's been several years since that memorial, and I have been working through and truly understanding how to process grief. And that's what this course is about. Many of you probably know my story. That's why you joined this course. But I want to just give you an overview of how I got to this place of being an expert in grief. And it's not just because of the grief that I have experienced, but because of my ability to learn to process grief. So my first big grief started in 2005 when my son Johnny died in a drowning accident. And I did what every good mother does. I had 6 other children, 5 adopted, 2 biological. Johnny was a 3-child sibling group that I had adopted. And I just pushed forward and I focused on his biological sisters, and I did a little bit of grief, but I'm a psychiatric nurse practitioner. I did not actually feel that pain. And because life kept going on, and I think this happens with many people in grief, is that they have other children, they have responsibilities, and they must push on. My biological son at that time began to have a type of catastrophic epilepsy, and we could not figure out how to not only stop his seizures, but where they were coming from. And during this very, very stressful time in my life, I'm raising 6 children. I'm grieving Johnny's death. His biological sisters were kind of rebelling or showing their trauma. And Reggie was just having seizure after seizure and doctor's appointment after doctor's appointment. I developed what I now call the mentally strong method. It's like, how do you actually learn to take care of yourself? And how do you think through your problems, organize them, and make choices in line with what you really want? And I just began to really try to practice those things in the midst of a very difficult and stressful time in my life. And it wasn't a short period of time. It was a period of 10 years. And in 2016, my biological son, Reggie, succumbed to what we now know was DRPLA. And he died. And I thought I knew how to process and to grieve. And if you are in this course and you have lost a child, you know that it is literally the most difficult thing. But I knew at that moment that I had to figure it out, or I wasn't going to want to live. I had to figure it out for my husband, for my daughter Maya, who also had DRPLA, but just not sick, seizures well controlled, beautiful life. And I knew I had to figure it out so that I could have quality time with her. And so at that time, I started teaching what I call controlled grief. And we will talk about that throughout this course. Controlled grief is about taking the time to feel the pain. You don't want to feel the pain, I know. But we have to find the time to feel the pain. And I did controlled grief pretty religiously for 5 years. and I talked about it. I talked about it publicly on YouTube, and you can go back and follow that. And I continued to live and find purpose and teach how to grieve and teach mental strength. And then I woke up December 14th, 2021, to find my daughter dead. And gosh, God, how could you allow so much loss in my life? And I tried to go on. I tried to go with the controlled grief, and I just was stuck. I was so angry and stuck. And that's what led to my 45 Days of Grief, which I have a documentary on. I have a workbook on. This course is around all of the things that I learned. No matter how traumatic and how much grief you have endured, you can work through it. You can process it and cherish that relationship, those relationships. When I went through the 45 Days of Grief, and in this book I say, do it over 45 days or over 45 weeks. It can be a 1 year plan, because, there's always a week where we just can't get to it. It takes about, each day/week takes about 3 to 4 hours to do it right. And when I did the first 45 Days of Grief, I did it intensely for 45 days. And you can see that in the documentary. But I went through a really clear process for myself, which I want you to think about as you start this course. I'm filming this not in a professional way. I'm filming this. I am actually on a self-care trip all by myself. So I don't have my sister who normally does my camera. But I wanted this to be real. I wanted you to see that, yes, you may feel so alone in your grief. And I am literally alone. But I'm okay. And you can be okay. And when I went through this 45 Days of Grief, and it was 4 very clear chapters, First, it was choosing to grieve. I realized when it was, 6 to 8 months after Maya's death, and I was going to work and I was trying to process the same way I did with Reggie. And I was so angry and resentful, and it began to really impact my mental health. And so I knew I had to do something. And so I chose this 45 days, and it was from the anniversary of Reggie's death to the 1 year anniversary of Maya's death, that I literally grieved every day. And as I grieved, I was inspired with the worksheets that you're going to go through. But for me, I had to first choose to grieve. I had to do it again. And I really thought that I wouldn't have to do it again, And so as you go through this, first is that choosing to grieve, and joining the course, you have gotten to that point where you are choosing to grieve. But as you go through this, you'll realize that there is layers of grief. And, that anger is just a superficial protective layer, and the withdrawal and the whatever your protective layer is, we got to go deeper than that. And then I got to a place where I was like, what is truth? My spiritual conflict was so intense. How could God be a loving, protective God and take both of my biological children, take Johnny from his biological sisters after all of their trauma? And I'm like, what is truth? And I really had to start from scratch, not start from what I had been told or taught. And then in the final days, it came out of speaking my truth. And it really came to me, it was inspired to me of like self-care. We talk about self-care, we talk about self-love all of the time, but we don't teach it. And we oftentimes say we're not supposed to be getting external validation, but everything about self-love and self-care is external validation. And I really had to dig deep, and I was like, what is self-love? Me loving myself. How do I take care of myself in such intense pain? And I came up with the 5 selves. And self-care is figuring out what actually fills your cup. I always give the example of people are like, oh, you should go get your nails done. To me, that's another responsibility. That does not fill my cup. It is an hour, 2 hours that I have to sit. And it's just another responsibility. So figuring out what fills your cup. And I will be challenging you each day/week that you're going through this to find what fills your cup. What did you do for self-care? Spiritual self. Who are you? Who is your soul? And how is that connected to a spiritual relationship? And I am not talking about what you've been taught, what you learned in whatever your upbringing is or whatever your faith is. I'm talking about you, yourself, your soul. We have to, in such horrible pain, we have to work through the spiritual conflict and love our spiritual self. Self-regulation. Self-regulation is our ability to regulate the emotions and the pain in which we are feeling. Again, I will challenge you with that every day/week, but also the mentally strong method is the way that I do it. Thinking through your problems, organizing them. I do challenge you to take this course in conjunction with the mentally strong method. Self-movement. That movement is how things are processed. That definitely came to me. I know that movement is the way that things are processed. We talk about it professionally with trauma. EMDR is eye movement desensitization. That is a type of therapy. There's brain spotting. There's other therapeutic things. But what about somatic yoga? Or walking, or people who say that exercise is actually their therapy. Finding movement that allows you to actually feel like you're moving these things out of your body, because this grief and this trauma is going to stick with you. And yes, I am going to be sad my entire life that I have lost my children. But I am determined to move that out of the body, to not be depressed, to not be anxious. And movement can be as simple as listening to music and letting that move out of your body. I enjoy dance. I even did things like gymnastics. Find your movement. We often listen to somebody else. Oh, running's my therapy. And then you think you have to be a runner and you start running and you hate running. No, find your movement and make that conscious effort that the movement is taking some of that pain out of the body. Self-improvement, learning. I did a lot of grief theories, and learning, continuing to learn. And when I started studying grief theories, I was a little like nobody had ever that wrote these theories had experienced the grief that I had experienced. But it doesn't matter. We can take nuggets, and if they say something that is offensive or doesn't resonate with you, then let it go. Take the nuggets that you feel. So if you think about those 5 selves, your spiritual self, self-regulation, self-movement, self-improvement, self-care, this is the mental, emotional, physical, spiritual self. This is your soul. This is how to self-love. And that is how you actually process. I will come along this journey with you, but it is your journey. I can only give you a little bit of guidebooks. There might be things that I say or do that offend you. Let those go. Embrace the pieces that resonate with you and truly figure out, how do I grieve? I personally did this in 45 days the first time, but I continue to do this throughout my life. And most people will need to take a year to do it, doing each lesson, over a week period of time. If you're going to do it in a straight 45 days, although there is some benefit to that, you need a solid 3 to 4 hours every day. So get yourself in a therapeutic environment. For me, it's the water, anywhere near the water. And you'll notice as I do these videos, they are while I'm on my self-care trip. And just know that, yes, you have endured enormous pain, but we don't have to just endure it. Really focus on those 5 selves and the spiritual self, and knowing that there is an eternal connection with our souls. Grief is hard. And this course will be hard. But it's not really a course. It's just it's these activities to try to get you through that process of making the choice to grieve. Going through those layers of grief, finding your truth, and then getting to a point of being able to speak your truth. I'm so proud of you on this journey.